As we've seen in our studies recently of the life of Christ in this ongoing study, the last couple lessons at least, or in the last couple lessons, we saw Jesus feeding a group of people, this massive group of people, feeding the 4,000. And Jesus probably remained in that area where he did that for a considerable amount of time. We wouldn't call it a extended ministry, but at least he did some things there. And while he was teaching there, a group of mostly Gentiles, he was giving more personal instructions also to his apostles, to his disciples. In all the things that Jesus was doing, they needed to observe. They were going to be needing to meditate on what Jesus did, to the way he did it, to whom he did these things. Pretty much everything that Jesus was doing, saying, teaching, not only them, but to everybody who he was dealing with and how. It was going to be very important for them to take note of that, because they were going to be expected to do some things afterwards, later on, that they would need this training time. And this was not going to be an exception here on this occasion, because this crowd of people were with Jesus for 3 days. And they'd run out of food. Naturally, they weren't prepared to be away for 3 days, apparently, so they had no food at this time, and Jesus did not want to send them back home without eating first. And the apostles hadn't really thought about these people being hungry for whatever reason. And Jesus told them that he implied that he wanted to feed them. And the apostles said, where would anybody get enough food to possibly feed all these people, to satisfy all these people? Now, without mentioning the questions that we brought up a couple lessons ago about how in the world did they not think back, the fact that this just happened fairly recently. Even people without the best memory in the world can remember, pretty important events of the recent past. But without mentioning that element, they weren't thinking in that way. But Jesus was going to tell them once again that there was a remedy. And he would bring that remedy, even though they couldn't puzzle it out, even though there shouldn't have been anything to puzzle out. And by the way, Jesus often probably finds us in that same state of confusion and bewilderment, even when we may have experienced something in the past that should remind us, or we should remember something that he himself has told us or said in the past. But when he got no help from the apostles, he went ahead and did it himself. What do we have? What could we round up here? And they came up with a little bit of food, not enough to feed 4,000, to say the least. But he took responsibility for doing this, and that's what we read in Mark chapter 8 that Ron read just a second ago. And the meal that Jesus provided was enough for every single person there. We don't know how many, but 4,000 plus. How big the plus is, we don't know, but it was at least 4,000. And very similar to the 5,000, but with some differences as well. One of those differences, or one of the similarities, is that he sent them away afterwards. And that would have been an important time with the disciples, his apostles, probably to process what has just happened, and for Jesus to follow up on some things that they missed earlier. But one of the unique things, including all this, is how Jesus handled the human side of this. This was a divine miracle. There's no getting around that. But there was a human element too, and Jesus seemed to, there was a human element in all of the miracles that Jesus performed, to some extent or another. But the way that Jesus carried out this event really conveys important lessons for us today, for his disciples then and for his disciples today, and about service and responsibilities that disciples have. Even in that instance where Jesus miraculously provided food for all these people, the disciples had a part to play. They had responsibilities and lessons that they needed to learn from Jesus' actions. And we can see really what Jesus expects. Not everything Jesus expects, but a few things that Jesus expects in this account. What does Jesus expect his disciples to do? We'll look at a few things this morning for the next few minutes. First of all, number one, Jesus expected his disciples to think about what should be done. Here we are in this situation, here we are right now. Here's what's happening. Here's what we have. What should be done? He didn't command them to do something. He sort of took some baby steps, kind of led them like, what do you think? He didn't say, what do you think we should do in those words, but it was more or less a similar concept. He implied something and he left it to them, and that's when they said, how can where would we get enough food, where we are right now? We can't, it'd take forever to even find enough for a few people here. But he wanted them perhaps to propose a plan. He didn't quite get it from them, but at least they thought about it. Do you know how powerful and important it would be, how much of a difference it would make in your life? Not even in the life of a Christian life of trying to be evangelistic or trying to serve God, but just in every single thing that you do in life, how much of a difference it would make if you simply thought before you did it, before you did something. Think. Think before you speak. Think before you act. But think about, what should I do? What should be done in this situation, in this circumstance? What should be done? Jesus expected them to think about that. And in that case, it was not even really what should be done in a moral or spiritual sense, but in these circumstances, and considering that I don't want to send them away hungry, what say you? He wanted his disciples, just as he does today, to think about what should be done. We should do that in the different situations the church might be in, a congregation might be in, Christians might be in, that we might be in. What should be done, and is it something that I can do? Or is it something I can do with a little bit of help? And if so, I need to get that help. I need to ask for help. This is what should be done. This is the right thing to do. This is the best thing to do. Just think. It's so simple, and yet so hard to think. The more humanity goes in the direction of a lack of just thinking, it's not a good direction to go. You could argue that is the thing, one of the things, if not the most important thing that distinguishes humankind from the rest of the creation, is the ability to think. So what does that say about us when we don't do it? If we take away our thinking, purposefully, deliberately, not because of something out of our control, like an accident or something that affects our ability to think and things like that. But if we purposefully don't think, but Jesus expects us to think, just like he expected them to think. What should be done? And they did that. May not have come up with the right answer, but they at least did that. Second of all, Jesus expected his disciples to remember the things he had done. As we've already said, they really missed the mark on this one. And as we pointed out in our study, when we looked at this in more detail, they probably had some reasons why they didn't think that applied to this. That was a Jewish crowd back then, and this is a Gentile crowd. And maybe Jesus' miracles don't apply the same to a Gentile crowd as they do to a Jewish crowd. Whatever their reasoning may have been, Jesus expected them to remember. After this event, a little bit later, in fact, as we saw in our study this morning, Jesus asked them, don't you remember when I fed the 5,000 with those 5 loaves? You remember that? Of course I remember. Remember the time I fed the 4,000? Just very recently? He expected them to remember. Mark chapter 8, verse 4. That should ring in our hearts, maybe strike a chord, because it sounds like us. Where shall somebody be able to get all food enough to fill all these people? Sounds exactly like you. Sounds exactly like me. How can this be done? You ever thought that about something that we know that the Bible instructs us to do? How about preach the gospel to the whole creation? Go out and disciple all the nations, baptizing them into the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. How shall one be able to do that? I know I can't do that. How could anybody be able to do that? Well, God said to do that. The Lord said to do that. And yet we sound like the apostles sometimes. How can that be done? Well, if we're asking that question sincerely, we might realize that there are multiple answers. That's a good question to ask if you really mean it. How can that be done? Kind of goes back to point number one. Thinking about what should be done. How can that be done? Well, it can be done this way, it can be done this way, it can be done this way. What did Jesus do? He went around teaching everywhere he went. He's just one man. I don't think the apostles helped teach very much. It's not the impression I get through the gospel accounts. They were sort of just front row. They were like roadies almost. They were just in the front row everywhere Jesus went. And half the time they were scratching their heads as much as everybody else. Jesus just went around teaching. That's simple enough, isn't it? Well, maybe later in their lives and their ministries, not maybe at all, we know, they would have remembered that. That's what they did. They remembered the things Jesus did. Sometimes it took a little bit of time for them to get it, like with these two occasions of feeding these multitudes. They finally got it, though. They understood. Jesus said they didn't understand the loaves. They didn't understand the implications and the applications of what he did. But they would eventually. And Jesus expected them to remember the things that he did. Jesus' power. He told a storm to stop, and it stopped. You're not going to forget that if you see it. Well, if he can do that, I know he can do this. See, remembering what Jesus did would lead to application in the present and in the future, for that matter. Know and believe in Jesus' power, and the same is true for us. Remember the things Jesus has done. Jesus may not operate the same way he did back then. Nobody in here has ever seen Jesus feed 5,000 people, 4,000 people. Nobody in here has seen Jesus heal anybody or seen Jesus tell the wind to stop blowing and it stops. But we can read about what he did from people who did see it. And if we believe when we read about things that other people claim to have seen that are reliable and respectable sources, if we believe those, why wouldn't we believe these reliable and dependable, respectable sources who did see these things? Remember the things Jesus has done. And if he's done those things, I need to have faith. I need to believe in him and his power and what he can do and what he will do. He fed those people just because he had compassion on them. He had no obligation. He wanted to. That's Jesus. That's the Jesus that the Bible teaches us about. And if he loved those people so much that he would do that, something just so small. This is nothing spiritual, not directly, physical. But he did it because he loved them. He had compassion on them. He cared for them. Don't sometimes we approach our problems as if we've never, ever seen or heard about anything that Jesus ever did, that God is able to do? As if we've never read or heard where Paul said, God will do this or God will do that. God will help. Where Jesus said, I'll be with you until the end of the age. As long as you're doing this, as I'm telling you to do this, and as you go do this, I'm going to be with you. How often do we not remember that? And that gets us right back in that spot. How can we do this? We need to remember that Jesus said, I'll be with you. I'm going to go with you. Just like God told Jeremiah. Jeremiah said, I'm a baby. I can't go and do this that you're telling me to do. God said, I'll be with your mouth. I'm going to help you. I'm going to tell you what to say. I'm going to give you what to say. I'm going to be with you. And so, Got nothing to worry about. You know why? Because God, even if Jeremiah had been an actual baby, which he wasn't, and that's why he was talking to God, talking back to God, if you want to really get technical maybe. Even if he had been a baby, God could still make it happen. Because God is that powerful, and he promised that he would do it. So Jesus expected them to remember, and he expects us to remember the things he's done, and that would include the things he has said as well, and to make the proper application. Finally, Jesus expected his disciples to participate in what he was doing. He expected them to think about what should be done. He expected them to remember what he had done, and he expected them to participate in what he was doing. As we see in this account right here in Mark chapter 8. He didn't have to have their participation at all. If Jesus can feed 4,000 plus people with 5 or 7 loaves and 2 or a few small fish, he could have miraculously distributed it to them individually, don't you think? Why didn't he do it that way? Save a lot of time. That's a lot of people for 12 men to serve. And yet, he gave it to them. Split up all the crowd, divided them up. Man, this is a lot of time for a hungry bunch of people especially. But Jesus wanted them, he wanted them, his disciples. There's a lesson there for them. Service. Humble service. You distribute this food to this group of people. Jesus expected them to participate. He told them to. And it's no different today. It's almost like Jesus' ministry was a sort of training school, a preparation for the apostles, for the disciples. They were going to be trained by Jesus and eventually set loose. Okay, here you go. It's time. It's time for you to go on. Just like parents and children, even in the animal kingdom, instinctively, I guess with many species of animals anyway, they raise them up. When the time comes, time to go on without them. Leave the nest, so to speak. Jesus said the time's going to come when I won't be here. And we're running out of time. So rather than waiting until that time for them to start working, he expected them to participate. Well, how does that apply to us? Well, Jesus expects us to participate in the kinds of things he was doing as well. Just as he expected them to participate literally in the things he was doing, he expects us to participate in the kinds of things that he had been doing. Not feeding 5,000 people in a miraculous way, but that wasn't what Jesus went around wanting to do all the time. What Jesus went around doing and what Jesus said was his purpose. In fact, he said, despite the fact that we would probably answer the question about why Jesus came to the earth to die for the sins of the world, Jesus himself said, in addition to that, I need to go to these villages and preach. That's why I came here. So I can preach the gospel of the kingdom. So I can teach the gospel. Teach these people the truth. That is the purpose for me even being here. And that's what he expects us to do. And that is the purpose of our being here. To serve him, to obey him, to get other people, to the best of our ability, to lead them to him, to that same end. Get to heaven and take as many people with us as we can. We have the exact opposite objective as the devil. The devil, Jesus said, hell was created as the place where God would consign the devil and his angels for all eternity. His purpose in life seems to be to get as many people to go there with him as he can. And he's done a pretty good job over these many years. Our job is the exact opposite. To go to heaven, spend eternity in heaven with the Lord, and to bring as many people as we can with us. Or to put it in Paul's words, to go and preach the gospel so that we may share with those people in its blessings. I want to share, Paul says. I preach to these people. I go around teaching the gospel, not just because the Lord told me to, but because I want to share with these people in the blessings of the gospel. And that is something that happens on earth as well as in heaven, you could say. It's not something that will just happen in heaven, but those blessings can be shared on earth. Paul says, I want to share with them in its blessings, even here today, now, in this life, as we await the next life. I want to share with these people in his blessings. Jesus showed that same spirit everywhere he went. I want to share in the blessings of my heavenly Father with these people. Whoever these people are, I want to share. Even the people that were trying to trick him and trap him and test him. He wanted to share in the blessings with them too. He wasn't going to make them, but he wanted to. He wanted them to be in those blessings with him. And that's why we see him at times so downtrodden, at least briefly, sighed deeply in his spirit, as we saw this morning. He wanted to share in the blessings of the gospel of the kingdom with these people, but they wouldn't. Jesus expects us to participate in what he was doing just like that. Are we sharing the gospel, the truth, because we want to share in the blessings of that gospel with those people with whom we're sharing it? Or are we back like the apostles were in their times of stumbling? How is this even possible? How could we possibly do this? These people will never listen. Look at the state of the world. Look at the state of the country. The gospel. People don't want it. And so many other excuses that we make. Those are not even really excuses that we make. Those are things those are seeds that are planted in here from somewhere. It doesn't come from here. And it didn't come from God. Like Paul told Timothy, God didn't give us a spirit of fear, but of power. The Holy Spirit. Well, God didn't give us a spirit of doubt and pessimism. That comes from somewhere else. I don't know if we want to know where it does come from. But it's a powerful tool to keep us from doing what God expects us to do, what the Lord expects us to do. He expects us to participate. He told Jeremiah, hey, people don't want to hear my word then either. People don't want to hear my word. I want you to go preach my word, but people don't want to hear it. But that doesn't mean I don't want you to preach it. That's all the more reason to preach it. And the same is true today. We need to go out as we go. Make sure we take Jesus with us. Make sure Jesus is with us. We know he'll be with us. But we need to make sure we take him with us to the people in some way, ideally, by teaching his word and following his example. So, these are three things that Jesus expects of us just as he expected of them. He expects us to do these things. He expects us to work. He put his apostles to work. He's going to put us to work. The same thing that he told them at the conclusion of his earthly stay, right before he ascended to heaven, the same thing he told them is that applies to us. We may not be apostles. We're not apostles. None of us are, and nobody else is. But we are disciples, I hope. And therefore, he expects us to do the same thing. He has chosen us to take the gospel to the world. That's a tall order. But it is an order nonetheless. And if we want, as Paul did, as Jesus did, to share in the blessings of the gospel with these people that we know, that we love, that we see every day, or that we maybe don't see every day, we'll do it. Will we let Jesus down, or will we lift him up? Maybe what God said to Isaiah, pretty good thing to apply to us today. In Isaiah chapter 6, when he called Isaiah, he said, the text says, I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And then I said, here I am. Send me. And he said, go and say to this people, keep on hearing but do not understand, keep on seeing but do not perceive. What a powerful way to communicate that, to describe that. God looks down, he says, "Who will I send?" I've got a message. Who will I send? Who can I send? Isaiah says, "Hey, I'll go. You can send me." What if God looked down right now and you heard him? He said for all to hear, "I've got a message. Who can I send?" Now, I'm no fortune teller or I can't predict the future, but I got a little feeling that if that happened, you might be inclined to do what Isaiah did. If you heard that, if God or if Jesus himself appeared to us and said, "Hey, I'd like somebody to do something for me," it'd be like the kids in school whenever the teacher wants you to do something. Well, in my case, if it got you out of class, I would volunteer to do anything. But everybody's saying, "Oh, me, I want to do it." I think that we would see that here. But you know what? He has done that. That's the thing. God has done that. Jesus has done that. He has said, "I have a message. I need somebody to send. Who can I send?" But how many of us are saying, "Me, please send me. I want to go. What's the message? Tell me. I'll do anything. I'll do it." Maybe we should think of it differently. If that's what it is, if it's the way we think about it, maybe we should think of it differently in our minds. Think of it more like that. Direct. Jesus here, he's asking you, "Will you go take this message for me?" He's done that. But how much have we done? How far have we taken his message? That message. Here we are. However old you are, however long you've been a Christian, that's how long you have been expected to be taking that message. How far have you taken it? How many people have you told the message? How far has it gone from wherever you make your headquarters in life, your home, wherever you are the most? How far have you taken that message? How many people have heard that message from your lips? The answer might be scary. And if it is, the good news is it doesn't have to be, whatever that scary answer is, doesn't have to be that way, because you still have time, you still have the ability, you still have the chance, the opportunity to make it a different answer. And that's true in every aspect of our spiritual lives. We know what Jesus expects of us, or I hope we do, but what is he getting from us? That's up to you.